Thanks everyone for joining us for the We Don't Have to Choose podcast. I'm really excited today because we are joined by friends Larry Krasner and Parissa Degani Tafti. As you know, this is called We Don't Have to Choose because some of us are referred to as progressive prosecutors. And I like the idea that we are simply prosecutors and that we are incorporating research and data to do the things that we actually know will create public safety. But today we're having a great conversation with Larry and Parissa. Thank you both for agreeing to chat with me.
Delighted to be.
So Parissa, can you just tell people a little bit about where you are, what you're doing right now?
I'd be delighted. Thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love that you are doing this. I am the elected prosecutor in Arlington County in the city of Falls Church, which is one stoplight away from DC, right across the river. So a lot of what happens in DC affects us here one way or another, whether that's crime trends, whether that's National Guard coming in, and of course, all of the politics that we are dealing with.
Larry, can you tell people a little bit about yourself and where you are?
Sure. I'm the DA in Philadelphia. I am at the beginning of my third term, so I'm at about 8.5 years. And I kind of view it the same way as you do, Mary, that we are fundamentally reformers. Progressive, I think, doesn't necessarily define it terribly well. And we are doing what prosecutors always should have done, which is upholding our oath. And that means we protect people's rights under the Constitution and the laws of the United States. We enforce in ways that are modern. We support prevention in ways that are criminologically sound. And to put it mildly, the results in the reformed prosecutors' jurisdictions are compelling when it comes to there being more safety and also more freedom.
Thank you. One of the things I like.
Can I do mine again?
Yes, you can. But well, you'll have an opportunity to expand on that. You're both referred to as DAs, district attorneys, which I find much cooler than being a county attorney or a CA. But I just wanted to tell people they're essentially the same thing. But people, when people think of DAs, when I was campaigning, actually, I would talk about, do you know what a county attorney does? And they had no idea, but they had a little more idea about what a DA does. So you two are, and I am, members of FAFO. I've heard you pronounce it in a different way, Larry. Do you want to talk a little bit about that coalition and what it's about?
Well, in my opinion, all three of us are founders of FAFO or FAFO, however you wish to pronounce the acronym. But of course, FAFO stands for a couple things in popular culture. It stands for F around and find out. In terms of this organization, it is the project to fight against federal overreach. That, of course, means we hold the feds accountable as the law requires. It also means that we hold the feds accountable when they're trying to let their friends get away with stuff.
So, Parissa, why were you one of the founding members? Why did you feel it was important to be part of this coalition?
Because all three of us, I think, and many of our friends are interested in upholding the rule of law. And we got into this work as reformers, as Larry said earlier, because we were looking at a system that didn't work for everyone and that wasn't fair to everyone and that was not getting the returns on that it promised. But as we're seeing with the federal government, we're seeing that people are not being held accountable. And people who have money and wealth and power are not being held accountable for horrendous violations of rights, for crimes against children. Meanwhile, we're holding people accountable for petty larceny and things like that. And it was an extremely frustrating situation to watch what we were doing on a daily basis and not have the larger impact. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of this coalition is because we should be doing the work of holding everybody accountable to make sure we have one legal system, that we have one fair criminal justice system.
So like me, I'm assuming you were going about your work, and you started to see things from the federal government that were alarming to you. And that may have looked different in each of your jurisdictions. Larry, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, at the moment, Philly is somewhat blessed because we haven't had an ICE invasion. And even though we have a couple of ICE people who are, basically walking around the airport, and whenever scrutiny shows up running the other way, we really haven't suffered in the way that I think Minneapolis, for example, Los Angeles, Chicago, and some other jurisdictions have suffered from these militarized invasions that we all know are just for the purpose of overthrowing democracy. I mean, that's what this is. That's what it's been for a very, very long time. Um, but I think the beauty of the FAFO group is that people do not realize that the law still applies, and the law does still apply. State prosecutors have unique power. In some ways, it is more power than federal prosecutors because a president can always pardon a federal conviction, but a president has no power whatsoever, none, to pardon a state court conviction. So what that really means is every one of the J6ers would still be in jail if they'd been convicted in state court. They weren't. So Donald Trump could thank them for their criminal services, and that's what he did. We realize that we have this ability, this power, and we realize that we have a president who, in my opinion, is waging war on major American cities where a lot of Democrats live and a lot of, black and brown and broke people live. And we're going to fight back as the law permits, as the law requires, as our oath requires. So what does it mean? I'm not going to speak for other jurisdictions, but it means here we have to be vigorous about election protection. It means here we have to be ready to do what this jurisdiction has already done, which is prosecute law enforcement when they commit homicide, when they engage in cover-ups, when they engage in perjury, things of that sort. My office already has multiple convictions of on-duty police officers for crimes under state law. Why would that not apply to federal officials? It does apply to federal officials. So, in my mind, we're all kind of a bunch of Davids taking on Goliath, because God knows the federal government, especially with this fool running it, is Goliath. But we're a whole bunch of Davids. We've each got our little sling and we got our rock, and we're going to take it on. But I'd rather be standing there with a whole bunch of you than standing there by myself.
Carissa, you have probably a unique perspective being right down the block pretty much from this administration. What kinds of things were you seeing that were alarming to you?
The most alarming things have been the pardons. And, Larry mentioned the January 6th defendants. We had January 6th defendants in Arlington. Our hotels were full of people who participated in January 6th. We had hotel rooms that were full of ammunition getting ready to be deployed over to DC. And so watching those pardons, it felt like it was like a visceral pain, because it was watching people who had betrayed our country be rewarded for it, as Larry said. And then I look at my community, and we have a huge proportion of immigrants in our community. We're a very welcoming community. I also have an airport, and I also have the Pentagon and the DoD in Arlington. And so we are used to having jurisdiction over things that dual jurisdiction over things. And so this was a very natural path to follow, because we've often dealt with the dual sovereign situation here. And so if the federal government wasn't going to step up and uphold the rule of law, and if the federal government wasn't going to hold people accountable, it just makes sense for us to be a part of that and to be doing it.
It's interesting that you have the Pentagon, and that you do have, we all have jurisdiction. And one thing that's been interesting to me is this administration claiming that we don't. We hear that all the time. You don't have jurisdiction. Federal agents have absolute immunity. What And Larry, I know you've done some videos, but I'm wondering what your strategies have been to be letting your constituents, people know, and people all around the country know that yes, indeed, we do have jurisdiction over any crime that's committed in our jurisdictions.
Harissa, you want to go first?
She did say Larry, but
Oh, or Carissa.
yeah. So I've been mainly, I started with the local police departments and our local government to make sure that they understood that we have jurisdiction. And I've been at many, many community events where I've explained this. I have less of a social media presence and haven't made the videos, but I'm out in the community all the time telling immigrant groups, telling Moms Demand Action, telling all of the coalitions that we have, whether it's political coalitions or grassroots, that we absolutely have jurisdiction. There is no such thing as absolute immunity, and we will pursue cases where the evidence leads us. The challenge here, I think, is making sure that we get access to that evidence, and that's part of why what you did is so important, the lawsuit that you filed in DC, and why working together is so hugely important, because we're now going to be able to borrow if something happens, and I hope it doesn't, and I hope that being loud and public about all of this is a deterrent. But if it's not, being able to borrow that from you is going to be incredibly important to making sure that we have justice in our communities.
Carissa, you mentioned something that I think is really smart in that you have had conversations with local law enforcement. Are you, and I know this is different in different places, we are pretty dependent on cases getting submitted to us from law enforcement here in Minnesota. Is that similar to your situation?
It is, and it's probably even more so than in Minnesota, because in Virginia we don't even have charging authority necessarily at the outset of a case. It's not that we don't have the authority. We don't usually do the charging. What happens is that law enforcement takes a person or themselves, and they swear out a warrant to the magistrate judges, and the magistrate judges issue the warrant. And that's how a criminal case begins typically in Virginia. And for misdemeanors, even civilians can go and swear out warrants and have magistrates issue arrest warrants. So only when we do direct indictments is it us actually making decisions on charging, and we don't have investigators that are independent of police departments either. And so we are absolutely dependent on law enforcement. So whether it's a carjacking or whether it's ICE shooting somebody unjustifiedly in our communities, we don't get the case if we don't have the cooperation and collaboration with law enforcement.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we are pretty dependent on law enforcement, but we are also the entity that charges cases. So law enforcement submits cases to us, and then we decide whether to charge or not. We do have a handful of investigators, but they are trying to get us witnesses, the night before trial, that kind of thing. Larry, your situation is a little different. How does it work in Philly?
Well, in terms of charging authority is entirely with the DA's office in the city and county of Philadelphia. Yes, in general, we're receiving packages of information from law enforcement, usually the police, but also federal law enforcement partners or other state partners. But in terms of the reality of what we're dealing with on the ground in Philly, I think a lot of what we are trying to recognize here, because all these cities are different, and sometimes you have a mayor who's on the team and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have police authorities who are on the team and sometimes you don't. Ultimately, in my mind, the real resource we have is the people. And I don't say that in a goofy aspirational way. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. The communications around these issues, the ICE invasion, Customs and Border Patrol, federal invasion, federal private army, Trump's militia issues, unfortunately, at times, Trump's death squad issues. The issues around that require us to communicate with people who feel like there's no hope, like they've already lost, like power and control are already in the hands of the president, even more so before his latest, 27 bungles, which now have him so unpopular. It's actually stunning. But what we tried to do was to use social media because that accesses a huge portion of the population that do not necessarily watch watch the news on television or read papers. We started to do town halls. And the messaging was not just, yes, your prosecutor has this authority. The messaging was, but we cannot do anything with this authority unless we have the evidence. And the ones who can give us the evidence, the ones who can, in the most meaningful way, show what's going on here are members of the public. So, we would do these town halls in various different houses of faith around the city, and we would always end them holding up the cell phone with the light turned on, and everybody would use the corny slogan we used, which is bring the light, be the light. What have you seen in Minneapolis? You've seen, just that. You've seen all of these people who on their own already knew that they needed to video what was going on and video what was going on before the bad thing happened. It's too late after it happens. That evidence is in control of the public. It can't be redacted like the Epstein files. It can't be held back like what, law enforcement does with its own evidence when they don't want to play ball. It's in the hands of the public. It can be used by prosecutors. And just as important, it immediately can tell the story for an entire country, if not an entire world, about what is happening here. It's the most compelling stuff. I mean, the reason that the country is outraged and heartbroken about Alex Preddy, and I'm not going to ask you to weigh in, Mary. I know the position you're in, but the reason the world is outraged and heartbroken by what happened to Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy is because we can see the videos. We can see how disturbing, and yes, I'm saying less than I want to say, but how disturbing, how compelling all of that is. This is not new. This is actually how the civil rights struggle in the South in the 1960s
嗯
was victorious. It was the images of these good people coming over the Pettus Bridge, being beaten down like dogs by, state law enforcement personnel. It was the fire hoses aimed at women who were praying on their knees.
And
Those
children.
things,
Yeah,
and
and
children.
children.
Those are the things that wake up an entire country by these compelling, important images.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And as you know, when we realized we weren't going to get evidence from the federal government, we opened up portals where the public could submit videos and other types of evidence. We got over 1,000 submissions.
Wow.
For Preddy and Good. And people have just risen up here. And I say this frequently, and I want to be sure to say it again. In as much as ICE has been driven out of the Twin Cities, they're still here, but in as much as they've been driven out in a way that they're not so aggressively interacting with people, that's because of the community members here in the Twin Cities. They've done that. And so I think that we as DAs or county attorneys have a very big role to play, but it is the community that's really led this. And I wanted to circle back to you, Parissa. You had that conversation with law enforcement, and as Larry said, sometimes they play ball, sometimes they don't. What kind of reception did you get from law enforcement when you talked to them about, hey, you can investigate, and here's what we would like you to do? What kind of reception did you get from them?
So it's evolved over time. Initially, it was pretty disinterested and concerned about interfering. It was also driven by a sort of a lack of awareness that if they were denied access to a scene, or if they were denied access to witnesses or information, that we could actually go into court and into federal court and try to get them access. And so once they started to realize that there were avenues where they could actually work, I think that we started to gel a bit more. And we're separate. I'm the Commonwealth's attorney, which means I'm the essentially DA, and we have a separate county attorney that does all of the civil work and represents the county. And the county attorney is also being very collaborative with other jurisdictions to put in place guardrails, so that if they are violated, we have avenues to prosecute. So once the message and the understanding became clearer of what we could do, they were more receptive. And we are now in the stage where I'm hoping that we will be having tabletop exercises sooner rather than later, so that we can make sure that we have like very distinct lines of who calls whom and when. And, we're preparing briefings so that, we're not scrambling, at the last minute to put something together. And it's become much more collaborative since they've recognized what can actually be done and what powers they do have.
That's really good to hear. One thing I've told people I wish I would have known or wish I would have done, not that you can anticipate this, but before we were hit with this occupation, was to have those conversations, in part to get them on board, but also there were incidents that Minneapolis has cameras everywhere. You probably do too, but it's really important to get that video in a timely fashion because it gets taped over. And because the Minneapolis Police Department wasn't, and I should say it's not just them, we didn't get a single case from any law enforcement in Hennepin County, which includes about 38 something different agencies, for some of the reasons that you were talking about, Parissa. But you do lose evidence, you lose witnesses, even if they're not going to get the witnesses' names and contact information. It's really critical, to be having those conversations early on. Larry, how has that gone with law enforcement in Philly?
Philly's different. We have a single police department for a city and county of about 1.6 million people. As in many cities, the police department is very much under the control of the mayor because the police chief is an appointed position. And we have a mayor, and I don't say this to be critical in any way, but we have a mayor whose strategy is much more along the lines of appeasement out of genuine concern for funding for the city and the impact on a city that is usually considered either the poorest or the second poorest of the 10 largest cities. So we certainly have had some conversations, but we also haven't had a crisis where you actually have the tire meet the road. I have at the same time been in conversation with a small number of detectives who work in our office, who do have arrest powers and could follow through if we have some unjustified reluctance on the part of other law enforcement. And we also have a good relationship with our sheriff, who has certain arrest powers and certain powers to protect different locations. Our sheriff has made it very clear that she will arrest federal officials for committing crimes. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that we have to act like that's an achievement, because actually that's just the law, that you arrest federal officials and people who aren't federal officials for committing crimes. But, that's kind of where it is. I think there's going to be a lot of cities where you have the mayor and you have the chief prosecutor not necessarily on the same page. That can be a good thing, because you can have a prosecutor who has a very different job, a job that specifically involves powers to charge and prosecute people. Than a mayor. You can have a prosecutor who is loud and proud, and a mayor who benefits from that by letting the prosecutor be the lightning rod. Or better yet, you can have a mayor and a prosecutor who are on the same page that the law applies here, and there are no exceptions to that. But we're all, we all muddle through, and that's part of the reason that I think that the FAFO group of prosecutors is such a great idea, because there's a bunch of mayors who are vigorous about this. And there's a bunch of sheriffs who are vigorous about making sure the law applies to everyone. And then there's a bunch of DAs or chief prosecutors locally who may not be in the same city, but simply by having a group of mayors who see it the way that we see it and are being out there, we can provide mutual support even when the local authority is not on the same page.
And that's so important because,
yeah,
Mary, that's so important because, Mary, the reason why I was able to have the conversations with my law enforcement and make the progress that we made was because of what was happening in Hennepin County. And if it hadn't been for that, I don't think that the progress would have been quite as fast. I don't think they would have understood the stakes, and I don't think they would have understood what our power actually is. So we're in a radically different position now because we learned from you.
Yeah, I was thinking about mayors, and so our mayor was very vocal in telling ICE to get out. But other than that, hasn't really done much. In fact, one of the things he said that kind of makes me laugh, but I shouldn't be laughing about it, but when he was asked, would the Minneapolis Police Department arrest federal agents, he said their guns are bigger than ours. And so I'm curious, I see you kind of laughing, Larry, as well. Have you had that reaction from law enforcement in your jurisdictions, either one of you?
I think it hasn't been that honest, but I think the feeling is probably the same.
You know, it hasn't been said, but can we just go back to square one? Okay. Square one is that one of the reasons people hold police who do their jobs well in such high regard is the notion that they have this incredibly dangerous job, and they do have a very dangerous job, not the most dangerous, but a very dangerous job. This city, my city, shuts down when a police officer dies, even if it is in, you know, on patrol in a car accident. This city shuts down, the court shut down, the judges go to the funeral, everybody lines up based upon the concept that law enforcement runs toward the danger, that that's what they're going to do. So pardon me if I snicker a little bit when I hear things like, oh, their guns are bigger than ours. When was that an issue? When the guns were held by drug dealers, or the guns were held by a shooting group, or when the guns were held by any other criminal group that's going in and out of banks, robbing people, shooting guards? When was that an issue? Why all of a sudden, when they are, quote, brothers, unquote, in law enforcement, are we getting the wiggles? They're supposed to run toward the danger. That's the job. That's what it's always been. We, the members of this group of prosecutors, are in fact running towards the danger because that's what our oath is. And, you know, that's what the people we serve require. So, no, I don't have a lot of respect for comments like, gee whiz, they got bigger guns than us. It seems to me a rather obvious double standard that is intolerable in a democratic society.
And when I've had conversations with law enforcement throughout Hennepin County, I heard various reasons. One of which is some officers are afraid of of getting arrested or hurt or something of that nature. And one of the things I said to them was something similar, which was, you know, your community is out there with whistles. You signed up to protect and serve, and I get the idea that this is unprecedented. It's not something that anybody has had to deal with, including your community. And so you have to take a hard look in a mirror and decide, you know, who you signed up to protect and serve. And I also think the reality of it is that there are certainly law enforcement members who are sympathetic to ICE. Law enforcement is not a monolith. And so there are lots of issues there. But I think, like you, all of you, if you're one of our fellow DAs around the country, have those conversations early before it comes to you, and so you can sort through that before it happens. Larry, you've had some video, you've been very vocal on social media with videos, that kind of thing. Can you talk about your strategy there?
Sure. Well, you know, more than anything, the strategy is to reach people in at a time when the media is very fractured. We just in the normal work that doesn't involve protecting democracy, we've seen the benefits of being able to talk to teenagers and people in their early 20s through social media about important stuff like gun violence. And we did it because we didn't want young people to step into the shoes of other people who were being arrested for shooting each other, for multiple murders. So we decided that that was a way to do it. You know, I'm a huge fan of accessing all different vectors that will bring the message to people. So whether it is radio or it is social media, whether it's doing town halls in churches, going to community groups, I think it's just really important that we are in communication across the board. I'll be 65 shortly. And, you know, my idea of media was formed by watching Walter Cronkite on a black and white TV when my dad watched it every night religiously. That's not the world anymore. We have to be able to get to people. We have to be able to communicate with them. And we also have to recognize that you can say a lot of things about Donald Trump that are frankly disgusting and ridiculous. but he's good with media. He has a sense of how to do it. If we're going to win this war, and it is in its own way, a quiet war, we're going to have to do it by being skillful with media, communicating with people, and recognizing that we are really just, we're the tip of the spear. The spear is the American public. It's 350 million people. We government insiders can do a lot with the powers that we have, but we can't do anything without the support coming from public opinion. I think it was Lincoln. I think it was Lincoln who said that public opinion is everything. Well, it is. And that's why those videos, communication by many, many, many different means, activating a population that already feels defeated so they know what they can do. That's why things like No Kings are so important. And that's why, frankly, I'm hopeful that we're going to see somebody put together a massive turnout of people on election day, not just to vote and vote their conscience, but actually to protect the polls from militias, to protect the polls from unwarranted National Guard, ICE, CBP, et cetera, federal officials trying to intimidate. That is just intolerable. And I don't think they'll even try it if they see millions of people, rather than doing a No Kings March, millions of people out protecting polls, especially in vulnerable jurisdictions.
Yeah, here in Minnesota, one thing when this was happening, when we were in the midst of it, I kept hearing, and this goes back to December when they got here, you were seeing videos coming out of here where ICE was engaging in what appeared to be unlawful behavior, threatening behavior, that kind of thing. And one thing I heard continuously from our community is, hey, we're out here protecting us. Where's our government? Where are you? Who's here to help us? And Larry, you're very good at saying the thing that needs to be said. You're very outspoken. Have you, and I hear that. I get people sending me your videos saying, look,
Sorry.
look at what Larry Krasner says, because very definitive, do this, do that. Like if you come here, do you think that that plays any role in deterring behavior that we've seen here, that you have been so strong saying, if you come here, this is going to happen? What are your thoughts about that?
I know what I know. And what I know is they haven't come. But is that the reason? Maybe. There are other possible explanations, like the fact that Pennsylvania is very purple and has voted for Trump, in 2 out of the last 3 elections. So it could just be that what Trump is doing is he picks all of the blue cities and the blue states as his primary target, thinking he has nothing to lose by attacking Los Angeles in California, blue, blue, by attacking, let's just say New York City within New York State, blue, blue. So maybe he's a little bit more hesitant for political reasons to come into Philly. I think there are multiple explanations, but I certainly know from 40 years of being involved in law enforcement that there are some kinds of deterrents that work and some that don't. And there's a ton of research that indicates when you are dealing with a dictator or a wannabe dictator that you have to explode the myth. You have to make them foolish, and Trump is foolish. You have to make them look weak, and Trump is weak in many different ways. You have to make people laugh at them, and you have to make it clear that you have no fear at all. My youngest years were spent in public schools in the city of St. Louis. And even though I was a pretty tall kid, relatively speaking, I saw a lot of schoolyard bullies. I know what this is about. You want to shut down a schoolyard bully? It's not that hard. They run on reputation. You stand up to them and you hit them as hard as you can, either with words or fists or whatever it takes. I'm not advocating violence here. I'm just saying that's how bullies work. They work on reputation. They work on the pretense of strength. When you show that they don't have that strength, when you dare them to cross the line and they won't cross the line, everybody else in the schoolyard gets it, that they are in fact weak, that there is in fact hope, and that if we all step up and work together, they're never going to win.
I would also ask, what's the alternative? Making ourselves small and hiding and hoping that it goes away or doesn't land on our doorstep it's not a strategy. So, I think that we're doing, the 3 of us and our colleagues are doing everything that we can to assert ourselves and make sure that we stand up, because hiding just isn't an option.
So I was going to go back to our coalition. Parissa, what are your hopes for what we can accomplish?
I think that we can create an environment where we are protecting elections, by activating the sort of people that Larry was talking about. I think that we can train poll workers, and we can collaborate with our law enforcement to make sure that our elections are safe. I think that we can probably prevent seizing of ballots and things like that, because we're getting ready for the prevention of that. And I also think that, so I think we can prevent, and I think that we can address and hold accountable when harm does happen and when something does go wrong, in a way that we couldn't if we were all standing by ourselves. And traditionally, we haven't seen prosecutors band together because our issues are normally very local. But in these circumstances, our issues are national. And so I'm hoping that, you know, we create that wall, you know, that or draw that line, or however, whatever analogy you want to use, but that, you know, we show our communities that there is hope, that they are secure, and that there is accountability.
We've had other offices reach out to us to find out if this happens here or something did happen here, what do we need to think about? And we have certainly been the beneficiaries of learning from ICAP and the Washington Litigation Group, because as a local DA, we don't practice in federal court normally. We don't have to really understand, you know, what would you have to do to prosecute a federal agent. And I think it's a really helpful thing for all of us to be sharing that kind of information. It can be hard to be the only person or think you are the only person in the midst of this kind of thing. Larry, what are your hopes for the organization or the coalition?
Well, first of all, I hope everybody goes to federaloverreach.org, and that is spelled with 2 R's, overreach.org. Federaloverreach.org is the website for the FAFO prosecutors. It benefits tremendously from organizations like ICAP, which you mentioned, Mary. ICAP is, I think it's the Institute for the Constitution and its Protection. Is that right?
Yes, out of Georgetown.
Out of Georgetown, and it's led by a former DOJ prosecutor who actually believes in the law and the Constitution. There is a wide network of capable, talented people who are available and are either acting now or are ready to spring into action. We are looking for more prosecutors. We don't actually care what their politics are. We just care about their oath, which is to uphold the Constitution and the laws. And that requires preserving democracy. That requires even-handed justice, not a caste system, which, of course, for too long is what the criminal justice system has been. But we're certainly not going to tolerate a caste system where, you know, one category of people, federal officials, get a free pass. You know, ultimately, I kind of hope this is the bookend on what happened in the 1960s. And by that, I mean this. The federal government in the 1960s, when you had Southern sheriffs who were literally murdering civil rights workers and leaving them at the side of the road, the federal government brought law and order back and made sure that those people could be prosecuted. Federal troops were called in to deal with the reality that Southern law enforcement had gone rogue. Well, we have the opposite scenario here. The president of the United States is acting like a Southern sheriff who kills civil rights workers and leaves them in a ditch. That's what he's doing. And therefore, it comes to us. It comes to the state authorities to fill the gap that has been left by the Fed. The script is being flipped here historically. And I am very hopeful that on the other side of this, we will look back historically and be able to say, well, when the federal government went off the rails, the state officials stepped up and solved the problem, just as the opposite occurred back during the civil rights era. I'm really hopeful that that is what will happen. And I actually believe with some level of confidence, as I see how little support Donald Trump has in the polls, I'm very hopeful that that's where we're going to go.
Anything else you want to add?
I have a question about the portals and the submitting of evidence. And I know that you can't say anything specifically about any cases. Is there any concern that people will be uncomfortable submitting video if they're not anonymous? Because of course we can't have anonymity in court,
Right.
so we have to be able to prove that the thing is what we're purporting it is. Is there any concern that people won't want to step forward and expose themselves in that way?
I think that's a concern, not only on those 3 cases that we're working on now, but we also started what we call TAP, the Transparency and Accountability Project. And we've asked community members to submit video or other evidence, or just a statement about things that they have seen about potentially unlawful federal actions.
Mhm.
And many of the people involved in those are very vulnerable and are nervous about what might happen. With the portal we put up with Pretty and Good, when we got over 1,000 submissions, we actually told people that they needed to submit their name and contact info, because as you know, we were going to need to authenticate any
Mhm.
information we got. If somebody submitted a video, we would have the state law enforcement, BCA we would connect them, and they would go lift that right off the phone. But that is an issue where you don't always know if somebody might come forward and be willing to make a statement, but if it came to being more public, I don't know. I mean, we can't assure people that they aren't in danger of, being snatched by ICE or deported or otherwise retaliated against. So it's pretty frightening for people here, particularly people who stayed in their homes for a couple of months because they were actually afraid to go to work, afraid to drive their children to school, kept their children home. All of the things that happen here, people are still very traumatized and fearful. But, another interesting thing is people really do want to tell their stories. We have an investigator in the office who's been interviewing people, and I happened to run into her, I think it was earlier this week, and I didn't realize she was with a witness, somebody who saw something terrible happen. And she introduced me to this witness who burst into tears. She was so grateful for the opportunity to be able to tell what she saw. And I feel that here, and I think you guys probably feel that too, that what happened is unprecedented. And people really need to feel that there are opportunities to tell their stories, even, if they don't go much more than that we are giving them that opportunity, that there is some chance of accountability. I've seen, and I'm always going to go back to the community was the most inspirational part of all of this. But I think stepping forward and saying, hey, we're going to continue to try to get accountability here has helped some people here, and I think across the country, have hope. We
I'm
also, by the way,
definitely.
Parissa, when we opened up the TAP portal, this was like maybe a week and a half ago, we had gotten 320 submissions, I think. So we probably have much more now.
You're lucky that you have the staff to review those.
Oh, completely. And we have a large office. We are civil. We have a civil division. That's why we're the county attorney's office. We have over 500 staff total. But yeah, so we're very, it's wonderful that we are so large. And our people are doing all of this on top of all of their other work. We haven't gotten any other resources for it, but they're doing it because they live here, and they're inspired, and they want to seek accountability. They want to give people an opportunity to share their stories here. So, I mean, people here were affected by this. I don't know of anybody in the office who has kids that wasn't having a conversation with their child about who was afraid to go to school because their 5-year-old child was afraid of being deported, or their colleague. I mean, it's awful. And you just don't recover from that. Obviously we've had these tragedies with Renee Good and Alex Pretty. So it's traumatizing here, and for people to have the opportunity to give back in some way, I think has really helped people in the office. But yes, we are very lucky. We're pretty large and we have resources.
You know,
But
let me just say this. I was actually contacted by someone who had been a prosecutor years ago and then did corporate legal work. I won't put the
Mhm.
person's name out there, but this person had also done some police oversight work involving, in many instances, watching videos of police interaction with civilians in less complicated times. And in retirement was volunteering to do that work. This is one of the
Mhm.
beauties of the federaloverreach.org website is we're trying to gather help where we can find it. What more interesting, fascinating thing for someone with that skill set to do in retirement than to be a resource? And hopefully what we can do as a group is make it so that offices where there aren't a lot of personnel available to do this can benefit from that kind of skilled, experienced, talented volunteer effort. It really does take a whole country, and increasingly, we're seeing very hopeful signs about what those who are not government insiders are ready to step up and do.
Yeah.
We got an
And
email from an archivist, which I thought was wonderful. And I don't know what that would look like, but yeah, we are getting people who want to work pro bono, volunteer. And of course, ICAP and the Washington Litigation Group have worked with us pro bono to help us on, I don't know that we would have been able to do all the briefs and memos and lawsuit without their help. Sorry, Parissa, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say I've had similar outreach from people across the law firms across the country wanting to do this. People who have left DOJ and gone into private practice, offering to do it. And I think my proximity to DC has actually helped us recruit some folks who used to be at DOJ. So we have at least the legal and procedural knowledge of what we face going into any kind of situation in federal court.
Well, that sounds good. Thank you both for joining me. And I'm sure this conversation will be ongoing and I say this about what we're doing here. We're kind of building the plane as we're flying it. And it feels good to be building the plane with you and our colleagues so that we kind of have a model for different jurisdictions to try to fight back against this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. You just heard a conversation between me, Larry Krasner, and Parissa Degani Tafti about our new organization, our coalition called the Fight Against Federal Overreach, or FAFO. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you've liked our podcast that we've had for about a year now, please give us a high rating so other people can find it. We're about to shift focus, however. What we want to do is talk about the things, the programs, the initiatives that our office and the people in it are actually doing. And we want to tell you those stories by the people who are actually doing the work. You'll hear stories about our youth auto theft initiative, extreme risk protection orders, UNT visas, and many others. So please join us for the next iteration of this podcast. Thank you.